It's an important week, and unfortunately we had as many, if not more, dropouts than ever. I think there's about 30 players that were invited that dropped out for one reason or another, whether it be injury or by their own choice. Some reasonable decisions, some really bad decisions, but I mean that definitely takes the talent level takes a hit when you lose that many players. But there's still a lot of good ones down there in Mobile this week, and it's important. I mean, you certainly don't throw out 4 years of game tape based on how a guy performs in practices 1 week. But at the same time, it's a valuable opportunity, especially for I go to this many small schools as a kid. Like Ali Marpet from Hobart, a Division III school. I mean, you watch him against these little tiny Division III programs, and sure, he looks great, but you just don't know. But now we get kind of an apples-to-apples comparison to see him going up against guys who are as talented or even more talented, and he's answering the bell. He's having a good week so far. So I think situations like that where you kind of check off some of the boxes and get answers to maybe some lingering questions, and then also too, I think it helps you kind of differentiate within the tiers. Like right now, there's kind of a battle to see who's going to be the first offensive lineman off the board. Well, T.J. Clemmings from Pittsburgh is down in Mobile, and a good week there could propel him, who knows, maybe into the top 10 overall. So there's definitely a lot to be gained, and a lot of different storylines, and every situation is different. But even with those, basically a full round worth of players missing from the game, there's still a really interesting week down there.
All right, let's start with some quarterback talk here. Winston, Mariota. Those two obviously number 1 and 2. Bryce Petty there, Brett Hundley not. Should Hundley, number 1, have been there in your opinion?
Absolutely. And I don't blame Marcus Mariota for not going. I think he's the one guy in this draft that I would have said, don't go, you have nothing to gain by attending the Senior Bowl. But Brett Hundley, I think that could be a mistake along the lines of Brian Braum, Brady Quinn, Geno Smith, A.J. McCarron. I think a good week at the Senior Bowl, I think would have put him into the top, maybe potentially top half of the first round. I think he could have moved up that high. As right now, he's a day 2 pick. And the thing that's going to help Brett Hundley, though, is this quarterback class is so weak. I mean, you have Winston and Mariota at the top, then there's a big drop-off, and Hundley has his flaws, more than his fair share of flaws. But in comparison to everybody else after those top 2, he looks pretty enticing. I kind of compare it to someone who's dying of thirst in the desert. Yeah, a thimble full of water probably sounds pretty good. And Brett Hundley's that thimble full of water. I mean, he's a boomer bust prospect, but at least with Brett Hundley, you see flashes of early first-round type talent, and you can picture him being a starting quarterback in the NFL. And really, outside of Winston Mariota, I don't know if there's anybody else other than Hundley that you can really say that about. It's such a quarterback. So Hundley might get pushed up anyways, but I think if he had been in Mobile, he could have really stood out. He would have been by far the most talented passer at the Senior Bowl this year, and a team could have fallen in love with him. You look at some of these teams in what I call quarterback purgatory, where they don't have a quarterback, but they're not bad enough that they're going to be at the top of the draft to get a sure thing. But, I mean, how about the St. Louis Rams? How about the Houston Texans? How about maybe the Cleveland Browns? How about the Philadelphia Eagles? I mean, I think Brett Hundley could have convinced one of those teams that he could be their long-term franchise signal caller, and he just decided not to take advantage of the opportunity. So big mistake on his part, I believe.
How about obviously Bryce Petty's going to play there this week, and I've had a lot of people call me about him and asking why he's not being mentioned more. Where do you have him right now? What round? And can this move him up to how far can he go with this week?
And Petty is my number 4 quarterback in the rankings now, with the underclassmen included, and I think he's got a chance to go on the second day. He's one of maybe 2 or 3 quarterbacks that you could see potentially starting in the league, and there's a lot to like about him. He's got good size, he's very productive, he's got a strong arm, he's a good athlete. Some durability concerns there with him, but the biggest thing is the system. Playing in that Baylor offense, not a lot was asked of him. Worked in the shotgun primarily. There was a lot of one reads. He didn't exactly have to scan the field and run a pro-style system. So the Senior Bowl week is going to be huge for Bryce Petty, because he's going to be able to at least try to answer those questions teams have about his ability to run a pro-style system. But I think right now I'd probably put him somewhere in that 4th to 5th round range, along with Garrett Grayson from Colorado State, who I think is a little underrated. Then you get Sean Mannion from Oregon State, Shane Carden from East Carolina. But that's kind of the group. And they're mid-round guys, but I think Petty is probably the most physically talented of all the of all the quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl this week. So it's a big opportunity for him, especially with Hundley not there.
Is there a sleeper in this group that might get drafted 5th round or somewhere in that range that you say, you know what, he might not get drafted where he should, but this guy has the ability to start if he's given the chance?
Yeah, and there's very few, and I think Petty would be one of those guys in that conversation. I think Garrett Grayson from Colorado State is probably the guy I would highlight. And he had a really good senior year, and still isn't getting a lot of buzz. But I think there's going to come a point where a lot of these quarterbacks might get pushed up maybe a round or two earlier than they normally would go, just because the quarterback position drops off so dramatically after those top 2 to 3. And one other guy I'd mentioned too that's kind of intriguing, Brandon Bridge from South Alabama. He's a major project. I mean, he's years away, but he's one of the few guys that you look at and say, maybe he's got the tools to potentially develop into a starting quarterback, whereas a lot of these guys that we're looking at in the late rounds of the quarterback position this year, best case scenario, you're talking backups in the NFL, I think. Shane Carden from East Carolina, Cody Fajardo from Nevada, Blake Sims from Alabama, Hudson Mason from Georgia, guys like that. I think there's a lot of backup quarterbacks. I don't know how many there are that you could legitimately say, okay, I think he has even the potential to be a starter. It's a really short list this year.
All right, let's look at some wideouts, because obviously with the Eagles, that's a spot that they could be looking at with Deshaun Jackson gone. Could they be looking for a guy to replace him? I'm not looking for a Deshaun Jackson type of guy. We're looking for a guy who's probably bigger, more physical, but could be a big play guy. Do those guys exist? I know last year's draft had a lot of depth at wide receiver. Who are some of the names the Eagles could be looking at in the 20 range?
Yeah, and this is going to be another good crop of wide receivers. Not as good as last year's. Every class is going to pale in comparison to last year's wideout class. That was just truly special. But this is going to be another really good one. A lot of underclassmen came out once again. I don't know if there's going to be value in the first round. Maybe a Devontae Parker from Louisville, although I don't know that he makes it to 20, and I don't know that the Eagles will go wide receiver in the first round either. But second round, a couple guys, Sammy Coates from Auburn and Devin Smith from Ohio State, the two best vertical threats in this class. And they're not well-rounded players yet. They need to work on running a full route tree and master the nuances of the position. But when it comes to just running straight down the field and running that 9 route, nobody's better than Coates and Smith. And I think both of those guys averaged in the 20s, over 20 yards a catch, I think almost in the case of Devin Smith. So I think those are two guys I would watch out for in the second round. And then a little further down the line, maybe a Tony Lippett from Michigan State, a Drez Anderson from Utah is a player I like. He's a little underrated. Brashad Perriman, the son of Brett Perriman, for those who remember, used to play for the Detroit Lions. He came out from Central Florida. I think he could be an intriguing middle-round option. There's going to be wide receivers available all throughout. This is going to be another class where if you need one in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth round, there's going to be good ones available.
How about Kevin White? Where do you put him? Obviously, some people think he might be the best, but, I'm a West Virginia grad. I watch him play a lot, but he scares me a little bit because of his lack of experience. Where do you see him? Is he a guy that you think's a first-rounder?
Yeah, junior college player, had a terrific senior campaign, probably helped himself as much as any senior prospect in the entire country, and he's right in the mix, battling to be the first receiver off the board. Now Amari Cooper from Alabama is the favorite, but it's not like he's a special prospect at that position, so he could be overtaken. And then Devontae Parker from Louisville, who I mentioned earlier, and then Kevin White from West Virginia. Those are kind of the three guys jockeying for those top 3 spots at the wideout position this year. And the big question Kevin White has to answer is the speed. And he's another guy who did not play in the Senior Bowl, so he's focusing on his training. He wants to run that good 40-yard dash time. And nobody's expecting him to run a 4.3, but, I mean, if he can run somewhere high 4.4s, low 4.5s, I think that'll secure him a spot somewhere in the top half of the first round. And the guy he's drawn comparisons to Larry Fitzgerald, and that's a pretty good guy to be compared to. And he's not maybe the fastest or most explosive player, but he's just he's got really good hands, outstanding ball skills and body control. So Kevin White, I think it's dependent on how well he runs, but somewhere in that top 15 to top 25 range.
All right, I want to go to the defensive side of the ball. Scott Wright, the president of DraftCountdown.com, for everything on the NFL draft. This is a very interesting one. Before we go to defense real fast, there's a report yesterday that basically Scott said the Eagles are going to do whatever they have to or whatever they can to try to get Mariota. The last time you were on, to go from 20 to wherever you think Mariota might be, it sounds like the Eagles are going to at least try to put a package together. What is the lowest you would see Mariota falling to? I mean, last year, this thing started with Bridgewater at the top. He went all the way down to 32. Geno Smith, he was the number one guy, and then he goes in the second round. What is the worst-case scenario for Mariota?
I mean, the absolute worst-case scenario would be the St. Louis Rams at 10, and that would be shocking, I think. I'd fall off my chair if he fell that far. I think more reasonably would be me Redskins at 5, the Jets at 6. But I don't think he gets out of the top 2. If you're the Tennessee Titans and Mariota's there, I don't know how you can pass on him. I mean, Zach Mettenberger showed some signs, but he hasn't shown enough to justify passing on a prospect of Mariota's level. So, we talked about it last time. I think it's just completely unrealistic for the Eagles to jump that far. You look back when the Redskins moved up for Robert Griffin III to go, they moved up 6-2 and it cost 3 first-round picks and change. Just imagine what it would take to go from 20 to 6 or 20 to 2. I mean, it's just it's unfeasible, I think. Now, I think Brett Hundley is a much more reasonable target for the Eagles, and he's a guy that I've heard they're interested in, they like, and that would make a lot more sense. I know that they do it in the first round at 20. I think that would be a little rich, but like I talked about earlier, I think some team could potentially reach on Hundley just because he's so much more enticing than all of the other options after Winston Mariota. So if I were an Eagles fan, I'd be focusing my attention much more so on Brett Hundley of UCLA than Marcus Mariota.
All right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball because obviously they need some work in their secondary. One guy that they met with yesterday is a safety, Curtis Drummond from Michigan State, and obviously they need some help at the safety spot here. What is a guy like Curtis Drummond? Should Eagle fans be excited when you hear him? His name is one. Another guy they met with, I believe, was a Deron Smith there as well. So actually not Smith. It was a kid from Utah. So I got to get his name in a second. But
Derek Rowe.
Yeah, there you go. Derek Rowe was the second guy. There are 2 guys the Eagles met with in the secondary. Any excitement there?
Yeah, and safety is one of the weaker positions in this class. It's not really top-heavy. I think there's some depth beyond the first round, but I think Landon Collins from Alabama is the only first-round safety right now. I like Deron Smith from Fresno State. Actually, you mentioned his name. He's not playing the Senior Bowl. He was hurt a little bit, but I think he's one of the best all-around safeties in this class in terms of defending the run and the pass. Curtis Drummond is one of those guys who does everything pretty well, but nothing necessarily great. And I think he's maybe a little bit overrated. I actually have him as my overrated safety on my overrated, underrated list. I think he's somewhere in that 3rd to 4th round range. And then Eric Rowe is kind of a cornerback safety tweener. He's played both, and he's getting a look at both positions at the Senior Bowl. So that's a situation where teams have to kind of figure out which direction they want to go with him. And obviously you give him a chance at corner, I think. And if it doesn't work out, you always have the plan B and moving him inside. But, it's about safety class. I don't think in the first round, but I think the Eagles will be able to get one second, third, fourth. Gerard Hallman from Louisville. I mean, he had, I think, 14 interceptions this past season. A little overrated because of the statistics, I think, and he doesn't offer much run support. But if you're just looking for a rangy guy who can go take the ball away from the opposing quarterbacks, Hallman's intriguing. Quisky Tart from Sanford is having a small school kid's having a good week at the Senior Bowl. And one other guy I'll mention that I'm really high on, Demarius Randall from Arizona State, another guy who had a breakout senior campaign, moving up draft boards. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's going to be an intriguing fit for someone in the middle rounds as well. So I think that's kind of your sweet spot for the safety position this year. Unless you're going to get Landon Collins in the top half of the first round, I think, second, third, fourth round, I think is where the value is going to be at safety.
Talking with Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. He's at Draft Countdown on Twitter as well. Another name that's going to meet with Chip Kelly tonight is Quentin Rollins from Miami of Ohio, and obviously they need a corner really bad, and he kind of fits the mold. 6 foot, 200 pounds. That sounds like a bigger guy that Chip Kelly likes.
Now you're in my wheelhouse. I am a huge Quentin Rollins fan. I have been driving his bandwagon since very early in the season, and for those who aren't familiar with the situation, he played college basketball for 4 years at Miami of Ohio. and was a starter, a productive player, and he had one more year of eligibility in college. He decided to come out for the football team, kind of like Jimmy Graham did, and just had an incredible season. And the thing that impressed me most about Rollins is how quickly he made the transition. If you didn't know that he was playing his first football game in college, you would have never figured it out, because he looked like he belonged immediately, to the point where even 2, 3, 4 games into the season, opponents usually you go in, hey, we got a basketball player at cornerback, let's attack him. It was just the opposite. Opposing teams were avoiding his side of the field within the first month of his playing college football. So that really says a lot. Like you said, he's got the prototypical size that you look for. The one question is the long speed. We're going to have to see how he runs and if he can run step for step down the field with elite wide receivers. But even if he can't play corner, I think he could be a really good safety, because he's very physical as well. At one point, he was leading the country in interceptions before teams started to avoid him. So I'm a huge fan of Quentin Rollins. I have him as my number 3 cornerback right now. I doubt anybody has him any higher than me, and I could probably be talked into put him up even higher. I think there's a chance he ends up in the first round when all is said and done. Quentin Rollins, he's one of my favorite prospects in this class, regardless of position.
Well, obviously that's a spot the Eagles would be looking at. Where do you think is his range? First, is that you're taking him in the second round, third round? Is that somewhere where you're expecting him to go?
Yeah, I could see him sneaking into that back end of the first round. I've heard him linked to the Steelers, another team that's going to be in the market for a cornerback early on. So I think somewhere in that maybe 25 or 22 to 25 to maybe the middle of the second round, I think is where he's going to come off the board, assuming he runs adequately. And that's another case where we're not necessarily going to be a 4-3 guy, but we just want to make sure he's not a 4-7 or anything like that. But I don't think that's the case. He's a really good athlete. But yeah, I think somewhere late in the first round. And honestly, I'm working on a new mock draft right now, and I'm going to be leaning cornerback for the Eagles. The leader right now is Trey Waynes from Michigan State. He's the favorite to be the first corner off the board. So the Eagles, they could conceivably have their choice of cornerbacks if they want to go that direction in the first round. And it's not a great class in terms of the top-end talent. You don't have a Champ Bailey or a guy like that in this class, but there's some pretty good depth. So the Eagles are actually, if they wanted to go cornerback in the first round, they're in a pretty good spot at number 20 where they could kind of have their pick of the litter.
What's your take on Ifo Ekpre-Olomu, obviously Oregon? A little undersized for Chip Kelly, but that school holds some weight. We know he had the injury, so where is he now?
Yeah, and a kid who it's a shame, late in the year, blew out his knee in practice, and it's going to affect his draft stock. Was a little overrated at one point in the process. You mentioned the size. They list him at 5'10". He's probably a shade under that. He was never going to be the high first-round pick that some were talking about at one point. But now with the knee injury factored in, he's probably going to fall somewhere in that third-round area, at which point he could be a good value. And you know, he's a playmaker in the secondary. He's a ball hawk, but he's also physical. He's not afraid to throw his body around despite that lack of size. So I think he's going to be a nice fit for somebody in that third-round area. And it's a shame, not only with Ifo Ekpre-Olomu from Oregon, but we also saw Cedric Abui from Texas A&M, the offensive tackle, a guy who went back for his senior year, probably could have been a first-rounder last year, didn't have a very good senior campaign, blew out his knee in the bowl game, and now he's probably going to slide in the draft as well. So it's a shame to see seniors who try to do the right thing and go back for their senior year and have it not pay off for them like that.
Hey, Scott, last year the Eagles surprised everyone. They took Marcus Smith. He couldn't get on the field. Is there a Marcus Smith around this year? Is there a guy that, you know, has some sort of measurables that someone's going to take a shot on that might be a big-time bust?
Well, I don't know that it could be a bust, but I think Rollins, one of those guys, could be a size first rounder. I don't think it'll be a bust, but you know, and it's hard to say too. We're still so far out. The teams themselves haven't really identified what direction they're going to be going yet. They still have to deal with their own free agents and sign other free agents, so it's still pretty early. And even Marcus Smith, we talked about right after, he wasn't as big of a reach as it was made out to be. He was legitimately in that late first, early second round conversation. But you know, just instead of a surprise first round, I think Quentin Rollins has a chance, really because of his talent, because this cornerback position, there really isn't a consensus, not even at the very top. It's still very muddied, maybe more so than any other position. So there's an opportunity for a guy like Quentin Rollins, who, in my opinion, he's as physically talented as any cornerback in this class. The only thing he's lacking is experience.
I'll ask you, last time I had you on, Max Valles had just announced, I know you were going to go do some tape work. I saw your tweets the next day. You have him rated as the number 4 outside linebacker. Here's a kid that's really young. What is your take on Valles? What round do you think he could go in?
Yeah, came out as a true sophomore eligibility-wise. He was eligible for the draft, though, because he spent a year at a prep school after high school, so he's 3 years out. And my first impression is I wish he had gone back to school because there's no denying the talent. It reminds me of Mingle, where he doesn't always know what he's doing, but he just kind of glides around the field. He's just a really good-looking athlete. Technically, they listed him as an outside linebacker, but he kind of operated as a stand-up defensive end. He didn't work in reverse too terribly much there at Virginia, but he's just rough. And that's the thing. But he doesn't have anything that can't be taught. It's just a matter of how much patience and how much time do teams have to work with a guy like that. But I have him in my top 50 overall, based largely on potential, and I think fall with that upside and maybe take him a little earlier than some would indicate. Based on the film, he's probably an early day 3 type of talent, but I think he could go on day 2 just because of the tremendous upside. And anytime teams are always looking for pass rushers, and Vallis, 6'5", 240, he looks the part and kind of has the nose for the ball too, has a knack for making big plays. So I think he's going to go a little earlier than maybe the tape would indicate because of that potential.
All right. For more on all of the possible draft prospects, go to draftcountdown.com. Scott has a great site. It's very clean, broken up by position, and all the new players are in there. The new mock draft is coming out. When can we expect that up?
The end of the week it should be coming. Friday, Saturday, I should be done typing up all the analysis. And like you said, I just incorporated underclassmen into the rankings for the first time. So fun stuff. It's a fun time of the year. Yeah,
awesome. And hopefully next week after the Senior Bowl, we can do a little recap and have Scott back on. All right, man. Well, always a pleasure this time of the year. We know it's like Christmas for you.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.